Now we have studied about common base configuration, common emitter configuration. This is the input characteristic of common base configuration. This is output characteristic of common base configuration. This is our input characteristic of common emitter configuration, and this is our output characteristic of common collector configuration. From these graphs, we are going to discuss about input and output resistance, dynamic resistance of common base configuration and common emitter configuration. So first we are considering the input resistance of common base configuration. This is our input, this is dynamic. That's when dynamic means suppose we have increased voltage from this region to this region and current increases from this point to this point. So this is the change in current and this is change in voltage. This is del IE and this region is del VEB. Okay. So the ratio between change in emitter base voltage to the change in emitter current is known as input dynamic resistance for common base configuration. So here this is in volt and this is in milliampere. That's mean ratio is of volt upon milliampere. Okay. Now compare this input resistance with the input dynamic resistance of common emitter configuration. This is the ratio between change in emitter base voltage to the change in base current. This is the ratio between volt upon base current is always in microampere. It's mean that this R input for common base configuration is always less than input dynamic resistance of common emitter configuration. So that's why R input for common base configuration is less than input dynamic resistance of common emitter configuration. It's mean that input resistance of common emitter configuration is high while input resistance of common base configuration is low. Now output resistance. For output resistance C, del VCB upon del IC for common base configuration, that's mean change in base current, base voltage, collector base voltage I have changed from this point to this point, and I have selected a particular graph region for the current. In that case, from these two graphs we are observing that there is a small change, that's mean too small change in the collector current. And here in common emitter configuration, del VCE, suppose you are changing your potential from this point to this point and change in the collector current. So measure the current, this is the change. Now see that del IC in this is very small while del IC in common emitter configuration is large. Then R output for common emitter configuration is less than R output for the common base configuration. This happens due to change in collector current. Here the change in collector current is negligible while change in collector current in common emitter configuration is larger for particular change in collector emitter voltage and here collector base voltage. So that's why R input for common base configuration is less than the R input for the common emitter configuration. R input for common emitter is higher than R input for common base configuration, while R output for common base configuration is higher than R output for common emitter configuration.